This is Haley Euler, the president for SETBP1 Society, which is our volunteer-based nonprofit dedicated to SETBP1 disorder. Our mission is to provide support to individuals with SETBP1 disorder and their families, to promote discussion and fund research, and to bring awareness and education to the public. And then maybe change, thank you. We believe our organization will bring targeted treatments to individuals impacted by SETBP1 disorder by being proactive, unrelenting, and focusing on our mission. As an organization, our idea of targeted treatments include proven teaching methods, programs, and/or therapies that help our children learn more effectively, medications that are customized for individuals with SETBP1 disorder, and one day a treatment that permanently removes the barriers that SETBP1 disorder creates for our children. And then Lindsay, if we can move, and then move one more slide. Thank you. During last year's virtual family conference, I presented this slide. We aim to fund one biological model for SETBP1 disorder, either a mouse model or human iPSC, induced pluripotent stem cell model, and a diagnostic journey guide through funds we raised in 2017 and from our successful Rare Carousel of Possible Dreams fundraiser. Here we are 1 year later. Next slide, please. And we have played a role in advancing 6 research projects. For the mouse model research, we have engaged Dr. Kat Lutz at Jackson Laboratories with oversight by Dr. Chung in her role as the director of the treatment center at Columbia University to develop a mouse model representative of SETBP1 disorder. Dr. Lutz is currently obtaining the SETBP1 knockout mouse model in France to see if it'll be a good model to start with. For human iPSC research, Dr. Carl Ernst at McGill University has collected urine samples from 2 families with a child with SETBP1 disorder and from 2 families with a child with Gideon syndrome to learn more about the function of the SETBP1 gene. Dr. Simon Fisher, our $25,000 SETBP1 Society grant awardee, is currently finalizing approvals to collect fibroblasts, which are skin samples, from families with a child with SETBP1 disorder. He will use those fibroblasts to develop human iPSCs, iPSC cell lines, and human cellular models carrying the SETBP1 mutations to further understand the disorder. We decided not to fund the diagnostic journey guide at this time, as we feel data collected from the current research studies will help to develop the diagnostic journey guide in the future. We are proud to say, however, that we have a SETBP1 disorder guide that just released this week. It was developed by NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, in partnership with SETBP1 Society and approval from Dr. Breguet von Bahn. Check out this new resource listed on our website and on NORD's website. Next slide, please. 2 SETBP1 disorder phenotype studies are kicking off and have been in development in 2018. So Dr. Angela Morgan will talk more about her study later in the conference. And Dr. Breguet von Bahn from Redbow Medical Center in the Netherlands is working in collaboration with Dr. Sid, our SETBP1 neurologist at Boston Children's, and Dr. Wendy Chung to produce the most comprehensive SETBP1 disorder phenotype paper to date. The paper will include data collected by Dr. von Bahn, by Dr. Sid, and from participants in the Simon's VIP study. The data collection for this paper is already underway and expected to be completed in the upcoming months. All of this has come about from 2017 raised funds. Funds raised through the Rare Carousel of Possible Dreams fundraiser and outside funding at various institutions. Funds our dedicated SETBP1 community raised during our most recent Giving Tuesday fundraiser will help support our SETBP1 disorder mouse model development. Next slide, please. Our focus for this year is to continue to collaborate and work with the researchers we've previously mentioned to help support their research projects and to continue to focus on translational research, basically research designed to help individuals impacted by the disorder. To support the translational research, we have our biggest fundraiser coming up on June 8th, so mark those calendars, the $1 Million Bike Ride, sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania's Orphan Disease Center. We will also have our annual Giving Tuesday online fundraiser at the end of November. We plan to continue to serve our community and are excited to help organize our first in-person family meetup in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on Sunday, June 9th, the day after the $1 Million Bike Ride. We hope many of our families can join us. And next slide, please. Our focus also remains on spreading awareness of the disorder, and we were awarded a grant from Ovid Therapeutics to support this mission. We will develop information sheets in multiple languages for families and medical professionals, reach out to genetic institutions to expand our SETBP1 disorder testing, and develop a marketing campaign which will include a promotional video to help others visualize what it's like to live with SETBP1 disorder and the impact on families. Next slide, please. Registration for the $1 Million Bike Ride just opened this week. You can now set up your own fundraising pages and register for the event. Funds for SETBP1 disorder research will be matched up to $30,000, and we have a goal to raise $40,000 before matching. Our goal this week is for 5 families to register to participate at the event, and we would love to have at least 5 fundraising pages set up this week as well. More info about the $1 Million Bike Ride event and registration can be found on our events page at www.setbp1.org. Next slide. 2019 is the year for hope. Be the hope, be the change. We are SETBP1 strong. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or share more information about SETBP1 Society's plans after the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Haley. And now we're going to pass it off to Dr. Chung for our presentation.
Thanks, Lindsay. Haley, I just want to compliment you and all the other families in SETBP1. You guys have organized so quickly and so efficiently. It's just a real pleasure to be affiliated with the group. As Haley had introduced, I'm a medical geneticist and pediatrician, and also the Director of Clinical Research at the Simons Foundation and the leader for Simons VIP. Next slide. And what I'm hoping to do is to be able to go over a little bit of the genetics as well as some of the medical issues, and I'll be glad to take questions at the end. So all of you are on the recording today or on the WebEx today because there's a child in your family with SETBP1. I think all of you know this, but I'm just going to go very quickly through this. This is one of the 20,000 genes that we have in terms of our genetic information. Next slide. And when you look at your family history, in most or all of your cases, this was something that actually started brand new with your child, your son or your daughter. That is that this was not something inherited from either one of the parents. It wasn't inherited from the grandparents. It didn't skip any generations. This was something that started new. One question that some families ask me is, will this happen again? So we as parents, or when we think about our other children that don't have SETBP1, will this happen again? And the answer for the most part is no. That is that for parents that have one child with SETBP1, the chance is very, very, very low that they would have another child with SETBP1, but there technically is a very small possibility, less than 1% chance, but a small possibility that another egg cell or another sperm cell could carry the same SETBP1 change. And so if anyone has any questions, I'm glad to answer it later, but the bottom line is that it very rarely happens twice in one family. For the other siblings, the other brothers and sisters of the child with SETBP1, they will not have to worry about that happening to their children. For many of you, that's not for many, many years, but just don't lose any sleep over those issues. Next slide. So I'm sorry, I put this just in words, so this will be archived, so anyone that wants to see any of this doesn't have to spend time writing any of this down. I will say that if any families are really concerned about this, they can talk to a local genetic counselor or geneticist at their local institution, hospital, university, and they'll be able to help them with issues of any one specific pregnancy. Next slide, Lindsay. So I'm going to review today mostly information that came from the Simons VIP Registry, the SETBP1 Registry. If anyone's having any difficulty registering registering or being able to, they get stuck on registration, feel free to send us an email afterwards and we'll help you get unstuck. I know there may be some things that might not be crystal clear or some confusion. So part of what we want to be able to do is help the community bring this information together. So Simon's VIP is an online registry, meaning that anyone in the world can enter this. This is the website itself is in English, but if people would like to participate that speak other languages, let us know because we're in the process of translating this to other languages. So far, in terms of the SETBP1 community, we have 21 families that are registered. And as I'll be explaining, I'm going to present the data today for the first 10 families that have given their information that I'm going to describe. What that tells me is that there are 11 families that are there are 11 families that are somewhere along that process of not being represented in today's information. It's not because we're not interested, but they just haven't finished the overall process. And that process involves us reviewing your laboratory genetic test report and signing a research consent to say that it's okay to use your information in a de-identified way. The reason that we review that direct genetic information, as you'll see, in the numbers going from 17 to 14, there were 3 families where it's not 100% certain yet that SETBP1 change is in fact a condition causing or a neurological causing genetic variance. And as I'll be showing you in a second, we have to be confident enough that these are in fact real genetic changes to feed this information or give this information back to the families. We don't lose the information over time. We revise and update this information based on our confidence and our understanding of the genetic variants in SETBP1. But at this point, we wanted to be really confident. And so there are 3 families that consented that aren't represented today. Like I said, if anyone gets stuck with any of this, let me know. But to collect the information, one of my genetic counselors at Columbia does what we call a medical history interview, as well as getting some information about how your child has been developing, some easy questions that are easy to answer. And hopefully it doesn't take more. It usually takes somewhere between about 60 minutes to 2 hours, so 1 to 2 hours in terms of that. Next slide. So this slide is showing you of the 14 individuals that we had a chance to review their genetic test reports, what the different genetic changes are. And I know this looks like gobbledygook, but let me walk you through a couple of them. Importantly, what you'll see on the right is that the number on the left is the number or is the exact address or spot where the genetic change occurs. And on the right, what you'll see is that for any one of those genetic changes, there is only one child. And so one of the points that I want to make today is it's really, really important. Haley was talking about some of the experiments that'll be done with induced pluripotential stem cells. And one of the things that's really important is to make sure each one of your children are represented because they're each unique. And so as we try and come out with generalities or summary statements describing everyone, I will say that everyone, it is converging. We're starting to get a clearer picture about the things that are the same, but I will say that some of the things could be different because the genetic differences are different. Each one is, like I said, an individual person. If you'll notice, and let me just describe to you how to read this. So on the left, when you see the protein change, the first, that 3-letter GLN or TRP, those are an abbreviation for the amino acid that is usually in that position. The second spot, which is the number, so 89 or 274, that tells you the exact address in the protein where that change occurs. And what you'll see is everyone represented here represents a different location, a different amino acid position that's altered. When you see that star at the end, or if you see a star anywhere within those letters, or you see TER, which stands for termination, or FS, which stands for frame shift. So any one of those first, let me see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 different changes, all of them cause what we call truncation of the protein. So it causes not the complete protein to be made, but a portion of the protein. And as far as we can tell, we think those first 9 changes should act about the same. And so, as I said, there is some convergence, there is some similarities for many of your children. However, when we start looking at the ones at the end of the list, the 854, 858, 874, you'll see that there is what we call a single amino acid substitution. So as an example, for the very bottom row, that's a leucine at amino acid position 957 that's now altered by a proline. And so in that particular case, for that SETBP1 protein, there's only one single little amino acid that's different, but we think that actually is what's responsible for the changes. We're not sure what each of those single amino acid differences mean, and so one of the reasons why we're not 100% confident that each one of these is the cause for your child's neurodevelopmental disorder is because we don't know at a functional level how that SETBP1 protein works. Over time, it definitely is going to happen, but again, for any of you that have any of those last 5 changes in particular, it's really, really important to be involved and represent your child in the research to better understand whether they're different, your child is different in some way, or whether your child is acting like the ones at the top of that list, so that we can try and answer some of the questions families had about prognosis and what the future holds. There's some relatively recent publications, and I'm showing this for anyone that wants to. I put the reference so you can actually go straight to the primary publication. There's a condition called ChinFill-Gideon syndrome, which some of you know is associated with changes in SETBP1. But there are some differences between ChinFill-Gideon syndrome and particularly what I was seeing in your children as you were putting up the beautiful pictures of your kiddos, as well as hearing what some of the challenges were. Next slide, Lindsay. So one of the reasons and one of the things I want to draw your attention to is on the right, again, this particular publication was focusing on ChinFill-Gideon syndrome, and you'll see that the particular amino acids that are affected in that case are very, very specific. It's 868, 869, 870, 871, but they're clustered in a very, very particular region. And it may be that those changes are different and they act differently. There's a different biology, perhaps, with those changes than what we see with the ones on the left, which are the ones, the families that are in Simon's VIP. So in my opinion, one of the things that's important for us to do going forward as a community is to try and understand what's the same and what's different. One of the hypotheses, one of the ideas is that all mutations, all changes in the gene may not be the same. There may be some that act in what we call a gain of function, or so they're sort of in overdrive. There may be some that act as loss of function. They may not be showing up to do their job. And there may be some that are in the middle, that are not completely in overdrive and they're not completely asleep at the wheel. So with that, some of the studies that Haley was talking about in terms of the induced pluripotential stem cells, if your child is ever asked to give a blood sample to do what we call functional studies or look at the biology, it's in part to try and understand these things. Next slide. And let me just also, actually, I'm sorry, Lindsay, if you can go back for 1 second. I also want to draw your attention. I don't want anyone to freak out by this, but I do want to draw your attention. In this publication, one of the important points that the group was making that I've shown below the stick figure is hematological malignancies. And one of the things people are wondering about is that there are some individuals who are not born with these mutations like your children were, but they acquire them over time and they may be associated with an increased cancer risk. And so one of the long-term things I'm quite keen for the community to learn as quickly as we can is whether there is any increased cancer risk and what it might be. My guess is that it's not for everyone, but there may be certain particular genetic changes that are. And so again, this is motivating a lot of the future research that we need to do as a community. Next slide, Lindsay. So as we go through this, I'm going to shift gears now, and this is now reporting the details of the 10 families that got through doing the medical history interview with us. They range in age from age 3 to 14. Importantly, and what I want to draw your attention to is it's only 14. So it's not that there aren't individuals over the age of 14 out there with SETBP1, but as many of you know, it wasn't necessarily easy to get your genetic diagnosis. And for many of our adults, I think they've forgotten about the idea of even getting a genetic diagnosis. And so they're out there, they're not diagnosed, they don't realize they have SETBP1, but we're missing the opportunity to learn from them. So I won't talk about it today, but we've got some other initiatives out there to try and identify those folks too, to help the community. Next slide. So in summary, the take-home message really is that the children that are in the Simons VIP so far are largely very, very healthy children. So I want to put your mind at ease. There haven't been so many medical issues. Really, it's been focused on, as people were saying in the introduction, issues in terms of speech and development and gross motor development and being able to communicate and focus. That's really where we've seen the issues. So for this, of the 7 individuals who answered all of these particular questions, it was consistent that individuals had, if they were younger, we call it developmental delay. If they were older, we call it intellectual disability. In particular, had issues in terms of speech and communication, although assisted communication devices have been extremely helpful. It wasn't very frequent to see autism, but some people had some of the behaviors that might overlap with autism, and issues with attention or being distracted or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD was pretty common. Next slide. When we think about when certain things happen, and some of you have older children, some of you have younger children, we just wanted to give you some idea of when things like first words started coming in. So for the children who had at least 1 or more words, it came in a variety of ages, but don't give up, keep working at this. Some individuals were uttering words or word approximations by the 2nd year of age. This is on the left. Children also were a little bit later, some coming in at 3, but even one child's coming in a little after 5. By contrast, on the right, looking at first steps, children were walking, some of them delayed, but they were achieving the ability to walk in many cases. And again, it takes practice. So some were 2 or 3 or 4 when that happened. Next slide. One of the other things that impacts, daily life is toilet training, or being able to have either control for bladder or for bowel. And on the left is bladder control, on the right is bowel control. And as you can see, sometimes it wasn't always 100% consistent, but children were getting toilet trained. Oftentimes, again, 3, 4, or 5, sometimes even 7 or 8 when this was happening. But for many children, again, with a consistent behavioral modification and behavioral training, could achieve one or sometimes both bowel and bladder control. Next slide. Going to the back to the beginning in terms of when children were itty-bitty, just after birth, just reflecting back, the neonatal time was sometimes, a little bit rockier, not terrible, but some of the children had jaundice, they were a little yellow, they may have had some problems breathing that resolved relatively quickly, but I would say these were minor things, and most of the children did relatively well in the newborn period. Next slide. And these weren't long-term complications. However, many of the mothers were the ones who responded or talked with our genetic counselors over the phone. Many of the mothers appreciated very early on, especially if they'd had other children, that something was different. And they were noticing things like they weren't latching on, they weren't sucking and swallowing quite as effectively. Maybe their tone was a little bit lower. But many people appreciated very early that something was different. Next slide. One of the issues that's come up, and I think almost, if not everyone, almost everyone has at least checked for this, are vision issues. So it hasn't been, terrible vision issues. It hasn't been blindness or anything like that, but we have seen some issues with children needing glasses and maybe needing having crossed eyes or strabismus. And I do want to highlight this simply because if it's difficult to see and focus, it makes it harder to learn, to take in the world around you accurately and to navigate the world. So if your child hasn't been evaluated for any vision issues, seeing a pediatric ophthalmologist can be helpful. Next slide. There are things that many of the neurologists, the child neurologists, notice when they do an examination. Again, thankfully, seizures have not been very frequent. We did have one child with seizures, but more consistent are issues like low muscle tone or coordination problems or being clumsy or taking longer in terms of fine motor skills. So those are the types of things that we saw more frequently. But again, these are things that many of you are working with great behavioral or many therapists, either physical therapists or occupational therapists, and for many of you, this has gotten better over time. Next slide. Some of the families did report to us some issues, some gastrointestinal issues. These were not infrequent. They're not certainly life-threatening problems, but they can, have an impact in terms of how your child feels for sure. Some of the most common ones were having what we call reflux or heartburn, or constipation or diarrhea, or even alternating between the two. And this can definitely be uncomfortable or make your child feel off. There are thankfully either dietary changes or medications that can be helpful with this. And so many of the children already have been treated in that way. Next slide. Infections have not been overwhelming. I don't think the children have any immunodeficiencies, but we have seen a fair number of ear infections, and I think appropriately for families where the ear infections were repeated, where they were more frequent, several of the children have had ear tubes to make sure that they could hear very clearly, which obviously is important as they're developing speech and trying to hear things clearly, hear words clearly. Next slide. And I'm just going to go through a couple issues on the next few slides. I would say these were no more frequent in children with SETBP1 than in the general population, but we did see one child with asthma. Next slide. In terms of other things, this probably is more SETBP1 specific, but we have seen relatively minor either kidney or what we call genitourinary issues. One child with hydronephrosis or fluid on the kidney, 3 of the boys with undescended testicles. And if those continue to not descend on their own or not come into the scrotum, it is important to have a simple surgery to tack those down. And one child where the opening at the end of the penis was slightly changed in terms of position. We did have one child that had a particular heart valve, which had a little bit of, was a little floppy and had a little bit of flow backwards, but not serious. Next slide. We also had a couple children who were on the shorter side or had some difficulty gaining weight. So that is something we're paying attention to. Next slide. And we did have a couple children that had, again, not anything serious, but some usual skin manifestations like rashes. Okay. We're getting towards the end here. So we did have some minor surgeries that were for the issues I talked about, ear tubes, orchiopexy or tacking down the testicles, one child who had a cleft lip repaired. But thankfully, as I said, most of these were very simple, straightforward minor surgeries. Next slide. We did have one child with scoliosis, and for those of you who have younger children, remember that our oldest children are still just young teenagers, and scoliosis is more common with children with hypotonia during the teenage years. So I do want you to check and have your pediatrician check with each regular child's care visit for scoliosis. Very simple to just look at the back and make sure everything looks straight. Next slide. With this, some of the families were wondering about particular medications. I will say, I know some of the families had asked about things like cannabinoids or basically medical marijuana, and to see if that seemed to work. I really don't have any information about that for SETBP1. Similarly, for medications for seizures or epilepsy, We only had one child on anti-epileptic medications, so I don't think we have enough feeling yet for what's the best treatment if we need to treat for that. But we did have children who were on medication for attention, for ADHD or hyperactivity. And so that is one thing to pay attention to going forward. Next slide. So just in summary, again, I'm very happy to say that overall, at least from the individuals who reported in Simon's VIP, the children seem to be relatively healthy, not major medical issues, although the ones we see, I hope we can do better in terms of helping support the kids. And as you're going to hear a little bit more now, still some things in terms of development and speech, which hopefully we can learn better ways to educate and to teach our children. Okay, I think, Lindsay, that's the last slide. Is that right? For mine. So I'll be glad to stop here and answer any questions. And for folks later, you're more than welcome to contact me even outside of the WebEx as well.
Yeah, and just a reminder that anyone with questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you can just ask them to Dr. Chung right now, or if you're uncomfortable speaking, send me a quick chat and I'll read your question aloud.
Hi, so this is Hannah, and I was just wondering in terms of the registry for the genetic information, if we're from, say, the UK or something, would you be able to request that information from different countries, or how would that work?
I just want to make sure I understood the question. So I believe the question was about the registry and families from the UK or other countries being able to get their information. Is that correct?
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes. So absolutely, the answer is yes. Internationally, especially for many English-speaking countries, it's very simple to do. Maybe Lindsay or Haley can send around afterwards, but Simon's VIP Connect is the website or the URL to be able to sign up for that. Many families, I should say, have a copy of their genetic test report, but if they don't, then we will go back and actually get that from your provider if you know which doctor to contact, and we're glad to do that wherever in the world your doctor is. It doesn't matter if it's in the UK. And then once we will also talk to you again, we realize and appreciate the time zone difference, but we'll find time zones or times rather when our genetic counselor can talk with your family to be able to gather the information. And if we need to document anything, we can certainly, as I said, request medical records no matter where your doctor is in the world. So hopefully there's, as I said, the only issue sometimes is a language that's not very common, but we're working to be able to translate the materials into some other common languages, as well as use interpreter services even for some languages that aren't so common.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
All right, and I have a question that came through on chat. This participant is curious if we have any information about kids dealing with fatigue issues. Their child was formerly diagnosed with a mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yes. So definitely, I would say for SETBP1, my experience has been in some cases that the children are definitely hypotonic, and so they tend to be looser. And with that, in some cases, fatigued or tired out easily. I will sometimes hear from families that, on an outing or something, they'll get more tired than their other children, need to rest or need to, be in a stroller or take a break. And I'd say that's more common. In the old days, I think children were misdiagnosed with mitochondrial disorders. At least from everything I understand about the biology of the gene and the protein, I don't think it's related to a primary mitochondrial disorder. But I do think in terms of the fatigue and the tone issues, it is something I've heard before. So I don't think it's just people's imagination. I don't think the children are just misbehaving or anything like that. I think it's a real part of this.
All right, and I have another question through chat, and this is just something that the families can do to help make or help move the research forward more quickly.
Right. So as I was alluding to, and Haley actually also made this in the presentation, here's what my pitch is to all of the families out there. As I said, the individual mutations your children have may or may not act similarly. They may group in some ways into some different ways that the gene is working, and there may be clusters, but it may be that each person really needs to have their child represented in the research. And by that, there are two dimensions that I think are important. So number one, I think it's important for us to know what your particular child's challenges and strengths and medical issues are. That's one of the dimensions. But the other is that researchers, as Haley said, are wanting to make induced pluripotential stem cells and model essentially cells from your child in a dish in the laboratory. Now, if there is quite a bit of difference between different children and different mutations, it will be important to have a library with as many of those different cells from as many different children as possible to make it easy for researchers essentially to study your child. They won't know your name. They won't know who you are. They won't be able to come and find you or anything, but it will be very important to have your child represented. And so one thing I was actually thinking about, and Haley, we can talk about this offline, is at least in the United States, we have ways of being able to get blood samples from your child, and we can either have you go to, a local place in your city, or we may have a way of, at an event, being able to collect blood samples. For families who are outside of the United States, it's a little bit more challenging, but I'm committed. We will figure out some way of being able to do this to make sure we have the community represented. So those are the two ways, and as I said, we can follow up with more specifics with the community afterwards if there's interest.
Thank you. Another question just came in asking if SETBP1 was likely to be included as an ASD gene.
Very good question. So as I think you saw from the numbers, we did have one child that had an official diagnosis of autism or autism spectrum disorder. That's what ASD is. So I do think it can cause autism. I don't necessarily think that just because your child has SETBP1, they definitely will develop autism. There's an important difference between that. That's subtle but important. I do think that we have, some of you may know, we have a very large autism genetics initiative called SPARK. And from that, I'm absolutely confident we will be identifying more SETBP1 families with autism that we're going to, I hope, will join your community. So I think you'll see more of that as time goes on and as more people get tested. But I don't think it has to cause autism, but I think it can be associated with autism. Okay, maybe we'll turn it over, Lindsay.
I just had one more question. Am I unmuted?
Sure.
It was just around ADHD medication. My son's currently on ADHD meds, and I was wondering if it's sort of better to have structured medication that's specific to SETBP1, or are the traditional ones best to use at the moment? I don't know if that's come across clear.
Okay, so let me just repeat back the question. So is there a specific recommendation, or do we have specific information about which medication for ADHD or attention problems might be best? What I'll say is that the jury's still out. At least from my experience, I haven't seen a clear winner in terms of one specific medication being helpful. I have seen, however, that medication is helpful. So for those of you who might be worried about it, if your child really is having major issues, I would urge you to try it. The biggest thing I would say is that we need to have greater numbers. I would say we're still very early in these days for me to have confidence about, if we're talking about, 3 or 4 individuals. I think it's hard to say, but so far there isn't a clear winner yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Chung. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to our second presentation of the day by Nancy Kauffman.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We good?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hi, I'm Nancy Kauffman. Just a little bit about me. This is my 40th year in the field of speech and language pathology with expertise in childhood apraxia of speech. As part of my weekly schedule, I've had the opportunity to work with children from all over the U.S. as well as from 11 other countries, implementing my methods, the Kauffman Speech to Language Protocol, known as the KSLP, that helps children to become effective vocal communicators. So I only recently became aware that I had at least one child with SETBP1, of whom I worked with directly, and another of whom I was able to consult with his speech and language pathologist, who also implemented the KSLP successfully as well. So these two parents invited me within days of each other to speak for this organization today, and now they have been introduced to each other, which has been really a wonderful outgrowth of this, and I'm just so honored to present. I'm going to talk about childhood apraxia of speech and other communication disorders in SETBP1. I want everyone to be aware that there are other known methods to help those with childhood apraxia of speech, CAS it's known as, and I will only be addressing the methods of which I am the author for today's presentation. Lindsay, are you going to hand it over to me to control?
Yep, you should already have it.
I'm not advancing. Oh, there we go. Good. So I'm just getting to know more about SETBP1, and I understand that there's a range of symptoms ranging from absent speech to expressive language delays, mild to severe intellectual disabilities, autism or autism's traits, developmental delays, and ADHD. So my focus today is going to be upon the communication disorders. I'm not easily advancing.
Okay, can you try clicking in the middle of the slide with your mouse?
Okay, so is that how I should? Okay, good. So first we're going to talk about speech motor skills. Everybody's very aware of gross motor, fine motor, and now we also have to talk about speech motor skills because speech is a motor skill. And it is a behavior that involves the mechanics of talking, the integrity of the nerves to innervate the speech muscles, moving the articulators of the jaw, tongue, lips, soft palate, to coordinate respiration too, in order to produce and combine consonants and vowels to form syllables and thus words. And as you can understand, it's a very complex skill. So I was thinking about the children that I know, and there are two populations who exhibit speech motor challenges that are frequently observed in SETBP1, from what I understand. So there, some of them are children with autism spectrum disorders, and they may also just have traits thereof. And the big thing about them is that we're talking about children with ASD who are minimally vocal. The other population are those with childhood apraxia of speech, CAS. In autism spectrum disorders, there's an estimated 30% of children who are nonverbal communicators. Some children with ASD actually do have childhood apraxia of speech, and then we're going to talk more about the definition of that disorder. Others may also have unintelligible speech, but it's really not because of a speech motor condition. Some children have a lot of jargon, and they might just sound like, and it really is how we sound to them because they really can't make sense out of what we're saying. And when they listen to a lot of conversation and try to mimic it, that's what it sounds like. So you might come across a child with ASD that has a lot of unintelligible jargon, but it doesn't mean that they have necessarily have a speech motor condition. But those kinds of issues are more rooted in faulty processing and comprehension of language. And then there are those with ASD who have immediate or delayed echolalia. So immediate echolalia would be a child who you might say to them, "What's your name?" And they may say back, "What's your name?" Or they may use a memorized script to communicate. They may say to you, hug you, or hold you. And that just means they want you to hug them, or they want you to hold them. But those are the words that were said to them when the hugging or the holding happened. And so what they do is use that actual script from somebody else in order to communicate. For those children that also have the language issues, some of the best ways to help them is through ABA programs, Applied Behavioral Analysis programs, and especially those that have applied verbal behavior. And we have an ABA program here at my center. The nice thing about it is that it's, the director is a speech and language pathologist who's also a board certified behavior analyst. It's not very easy to find ABA programs that have good quality and that have speech and language pathologists working along with their staff, so that would be an important consideration. In childhood apraxia of speech, we're talking about difficulty executing and or sequencing the oral motor movements necessary to produce and combine consonants and vowels to maintain the motor plans of words on volitional muscle control, resulting in errors in speech sound production and prosody. A more detailed definition can be found at asha.org, and that was in 2007. So there hasn't been a gold standard evaluation method, including my own. I have a test that looks at childhood apraxia speech that helps all of us truly identify those with CAS. Dr. Edie Strand, she has the most current evaluation tool. It's called the DEMS. The thing about evaluation tools is that in terms of any behavior that we're looking at, tests are really just a way to take data on the behavior. It's really going to be up to the speech and language pathologist to look at the data that we receive from an evaluation tool and then determine whether or not a child has a specific condition. So in this case, in terms of CAS, here are some of the characteristics. You might be thinking about your own children and whether or not they have some of these characteristics. So these are children with a limited repertoire of vowels, less differentiation between vowel productions and vowel errors, especially distortions. Now I have to say that not all vowel errors have to do with CAS. Some children have that generalized hypotonicity. They have very weak musculature. They may have weak oral musculature, and therefore their vowels may be distorted in isolation. If vowels are distorted in isolation, they're going to be distorted in connected speech, and those aren't vowel errors that have to do with sequencing movement. But if you can produce vowels in isolation very well, and then you start to collapse them in connected speech and they become distorted, those vowel errors would be more consistent with childhood apraxia of speech. These are children with a variability of speech sound errors. They may have some unusual idiosyncratic errors that sometimes defy transcription. And they have errors that increase with the length or complexity of an utterance, such as a multisyllabic or phonetically challenging word. And depending upon the level of severity, children may be able to produce a target word accurately in one context, but may not be able to do the same in a different context. They have more difficulty with self-initiated utterances as compared to overlearned, automatic, or modeled utterances. And we learn this a lot from adults who might have suffered an illness, accident, or injury and lost the ability to speak. Very often, sometimes those people can swear with total accuracy, but if you ask them to say those same words on direct imitation, they might not be able to do it. With children, hopefully they're not swearing, but some of their automatic utterances may be something like no, or wow, or hey, or some kind of exclamation. So those might be very easy for them to say, while other utterances are not. And then there's this strange thing called diadochokinesis, but really it's the ability to sequence the syllables of pa, ta, ka in a rapid manner. Patika, patika, patika. So in children who are 4 or older, if they struggle with this ability, that could be a sign that they have childhood apraxia of speech. And then prosody. So many children with apraxia of speech have a very slow rate of speaking. They may have timing deficits in the duration of sounds. They may have unusual pauses between or within syllables or words. And so they can sound very choppy, kind of not fluent. They may have equal stress. and they may also have a monotone quality to their speech. And at some point, they might have groping or observable physical struggle for articulatory position. And we'll talk more about that later. And also, many children with CAS could also have an oral apraxia. Basically, what we're talking about is, for example, a child that can understand the words "stick out your tongue," but when when you say "stick out your tongue," they can't do it. But if you held a lollipop in front of them, and they could stick out their tongue to lick the lollipop. So they're able to stick out their tongue, just not on direct imitation or direct voluntary muscle control. So there could be an oral apraxia as well. So what do we do for kids who are minimally vocal, or I'm going to say the word vocal today, but my methods, the KSLP, are very much rooted in the behavioral literature, or the applied behavioral analysis literature, and more specifically verbal behavior. And so the word verbal behavior means any type of communication, where the term vocal is really talking about the act of speaking. So I'm going to use the term vocal when we're talking about speech disorders. So there are many children, especially those with autism spectrum disorders, who are minimally vocal, and many of them don't even know how to imitate, even gross motor imitation, or certainly not vocal imitation. And that's a huge thing. We've got to get kids knowing how to imitate. One of the things we do is called rapid motor imitation antecedents. And I'm going to actually show you some videos of this, because it's easier to show than to tell. But basically what we're talking about is getting children to imitate gross motor movements, let's say something like clapping hands or patting our knees. But we're going to have to hand over hand help them to do the motor movement at first, till we can fade our cues and that they're doing the motor movements themselves to imitate us. But we're going to move from gross motor to fine motor. So we're going to get into some movements of our hands and fingers. We're going to move back to gross oral motor movements. We're going to get into just opening mouths, or sticking out tongues, or smacking lips, or something like that. And then we're going to get to vocal imitation, the actual imitation of isolated vowels and consonants and even syllables and words. So it gives these children the momentum to go from gross to fine to oral to vocal. And so by the time we get to them actually imitating a sound, like say ah, they're right there with it, because they've had that momentum going with the other motor skills. And another thing that we do here at the Kauffman Children's Center is called Sign to Talk. And I am one of the co-authors of this method, and Tamara Casper is the other author, just a brilliant speech and language pathologist. But it's a method to bridge sign language to vocal skills, and especially, again, for autism spectrum disorders, and I will be showing you some video of how this works. But basically, we're going to teach sign language to the children, but the way that it's done, if it's done properly, and it takes a lot of technique, can get them into the ability to produce at least word approximations or even full words. And once we've got that ability to imitate going again, we can start shaping consonants and vowels into words and making them functional. Another thing that we do for those who are minimally vocal are elements of what's called aural placement therapy, OPT. These are speech and language pathologists. They're highly trained through an organization called Talk Tools. We're only talking about using tools. So we're not talking about the other types of therapy that are typical for feeding therapy. This is just to gain some vowels and consonants into the repertoires of children who hardly have any. And we're going to use some tools inside their mouth to help them to produce vowels and consonants and get them into their repertoire. One of the authors of some of these tools is Renee Loy Hill, who is a speech and language pathologist, and she has these tools called apraxia shapes, which you're going to see in my video presentation. And finally, we get to my methods, the KSLP. Basically, we're going to take those vowels and consonants, we're going to shape them to gain successive approximations toward perfect adult target words by simplifying the motor plans of words. And we're only going to simplify words and we're only going to teach approximations if the child does not have all the vowels and consonants within important words to teach them in their repertoire. And I'm going to show you a lot about the KSLP methods. And I'm so excited because the two boys, both named John, had done so well with these methods and are really excellent communicators. And we're going to show you those boys as well. All right, so in order to show some of these techniques, I had to show you videos of children who do not necessarily have a diagnosis of SETBP1. And it's interesting to listen to Dr. Chung because I'm guessing that there are so many more children right here within our center who have this disorder and they don't know it, they don't have the genetic information. So I'm really hoping that this helps to spur on more and more families and children getting evaluated genetically and through the new types of methods that they have to be more specific. So this little girl is in our ABA program, and this is an example of rapid motor imitation antecedent. I have it in slow motion. Are you seeing it in real time? I can't hear it either. The technician is moving from gross motor movements to fine motor to gross oral motor to vocal movements, and she's actually then coming out with the vocal skill of saying ah. This is the same child. She's now going to be making approximations and labeling some of her highly preferred items and some members of her family. The technician is going to use some letters of the alphabet as a cue so that when she puts up the letter O, it helps this little girl to know that she's supposed to say O. Or she might put up a different letter and the child has the idea of the sound letter association cues. Let's see if it'll play. This little girl's now being able to put the G and the O together and to say go. And then when she says go, she gets to be pulled down the hall. And it works out well.
Oh, go, go! There we go! Beep, beep! Go.
Okay. So that was starting with rapid motor imitation, and then how once she started to imitate, we got her being able to say a word and be able to manipulate her environment, say go and get a chance to have a ride. So here's we're going to talk about sign language as a bridge to vocal communication. We don't teach signs because we want the child to be a signer. We teach signs so that they bridge to the child's ability to speak. So the first thing that we do when we're going to talk about teaching signs is we're going to follow the child's lead, and we need to discover what do they love, what are their highly preferred items and activities, and maybe even foods and drinks. While the child is showing motivation for that item or activity, we need to playfully block them from obtaining it. I know it sounds kind of mean, but it's not. But we're going to help to shape their hands to make the sign for it. So let's say the child's reaching for a cookie. We're going to block the child from gaining that cookie. We're going to take their hands. We're going to help them to make the sign for cookie. And we're going to say the word cookie 3 times in a natural voice. Cookie, cookie, cookie. And then we're going to give them a little piece of cookie. Let's say that the child wants to even do something like jump on the trampoline. We're going to playfully block the trampoline. We're going to take the child's hand. We're going to help to make the sign for jump. We're going to say the word jump 3 times and then allow the child to jump for a little while, but then take them off. They're going to want to scramble back on, but before they do, we block again. We take their hands. We help them to make the sign, and we say the word 3 times, that same word. This is what we're hoping for, that our hands can come toward the child, but they know that they're supposed to make the sign, and they can make it before we even have to hand over hand help them to do it. And if that's the case, then we're going to let them have a bigger chunk of cookie, or we're going to let them jump on that trampoline for a lot longer. All right, but we're still going to take them off and still going to entice them with the cookie. What we want to have happen over lots of trials and lots of time is for the child to actually walk in from another room and sign to gain access to their preferred items and activities. In which case they just get bigger and better reinforcement. However, what we're really looking for after a while is for the child to sign and to try to say the word that was always paired with that sign and with that ability to gain access to the item or activity. So you've always been saying cookie, cookie, cookie while shaking hands. The child may go ahead and make that motor movement for the word cookie and say cookie or something close. And if they do, they get reinforced right away and with large quantities and lots of fun. But let's say that they're coming from another room and they are signing, and that's been wonderful, and we've been reinforcing them, but they never then move to the ability to make the vocalization. I'm not advanced, there we go. If they don't vocalize along with the sign, then we actually have to stop reinforcing just the sign only. And we act like we don't know what they're trying to communicate. And it's a hard thing to do, to act like you don't know what they're communicating. But what we want to have happen is for the children to get kind of upset enough to vocalize with their sign. Hey, look, I'm signing and you're not listening to me. They might vocalize, and if they vocalize, even if it's a protest vocalization like, then we're going to reinforce them again. And what they're going to know is, oh, I have to vocalize while I make this sign. And then we can start shaping that vocalization into the approximation, maybe for the word cookie, maybe for the word jump. We have to figure out what could they then do as an approximation for those words. If the child never vocalizes, then we're going to go to rapid motor imitation antecedent again and see if we can get that imitation up and running. So here's a little boy who's in our ABA program. He's working with his speech and language pathologist, Bree. And you're going to notice that she's going to prompt him. She's going to provide him with a cue to be able to say make the sign for the word swing as a verb. So he wants to swing, he's going to sign swing, but he still needs help to do it at this point.
Swing. Swing. All right, nice job, Chase.
And the next is where she's not going to prompt at all, but wait. And then he makes the sign for swing independently, and he's able to swing.
Don't cry. Our friend is swinging right now. Swing! All right, let's swing.
Okay. So we worked on sign to talk type of programming with this little boy. And once he has many signs, he can use them certainly for requesting, and that's the number one goal, is to get children requesting, just like that child vocally requested go. We want to get those requests, but also once you can sign, you can label. So you can do other modalities. You can label items, you can answer questions. So she's showing him a picture for him to label, and he's labeling with the sign. You could also even ask a question, hey, which one of these things is something that people can ride in it and you can fly in it? And he could still answer with a sign even though he's not vocal just yet.
Airplane. Bed. Nice.
So those are his labels. And then we're going to get more and more into the ability to produce more specific sounds. This is this little boy with Carrie Peterson. Carrie Peterson is the BCBA, who's also a speech and language pathologist. And she is the director of all of our autism programs here at the Kauffman Children's Center. She's using a tool. It happens to be a horn. But for example, if you're going to work on, and this just happened to be available and useful for this little boy, but you could use a straw or a small cylinder to put inside a child's mouth to try to gain the vowel oo. And you can see the letter U that would be used as a phonics cue as a sound letter association.
Ooh. No, round lips. Ooh. Good. Round lips like you're blowing horn. Ooh.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Round lips like you're blowing horn. Ooh, good. Look at that. Round lips like you're blowing horn. Ooh, nope. Round lips like you're blowing horn. Round lips like you're blowing. Ooh, beautiful. Give me 10s. Nice job. Hooray. That was terrific. Best ever. Here's some beads.
Okay, and then some more tools. These are Renee Roy Hill's apraxia shapes. They're just different pieces of plastic that are different colors to put, and you don't see it because she's just going to show him these, but you can insert them between the child's lips for or for b. And I want to make sure that, especially for speech and language pathologists, that when we're teaching children who are minimally vocal, that we don't want to add a schwa. A schwa is an We don't want to add any vowel right away. If we're teaching m, we teach we don't teach ma. If we're teaching b, we don't. If we're teaching b, we don't teach ba. Because you know, if we have the word, let's say mom, and he's learned the m as ma, he's going to say ma'am. So we have to be very, very careful about our initial ways to teach children isolated vowels and consonants. So here she is using some tools and some letter associations for M and B.
This one says, you got it. Nice going. I know it's an M. You like that one, huh? This one says, you got it. And this one says, B. Good. This one says, B. Good going. Let's hold them up. You ready? We're going to do some practicing. Here we go. Watch me. Watch me. Chase, look. You ready? Look at. Good. B. Good. Good. B. Look here. Chase, hands down. Look at me. Watch. B. Good. Now, those sound really great. Let's try.
Now that he has an and he has an oo, let's try to combine those, and we're going to produce the word moo. And when we show a child a picture of an animal and we're trying to get an animal sound, we need to either say, what does a blank say, or a cow says, and then let the child fill in the blank, so that they don't label a cow as a moo. That's just technical, but it's a good point to know.
The cow said moo. Moo. Wow, that was good. Cow says moo.
Okay, so this child progressed and progressed on his consonants, his vowels, his ability to combine them, and now he can say hi, and then hi stays constant. So hi is a pivot word in the KSLP methods, and we're going to talk about pivot words and phrases. So hi stays constant, and then he's going to do hi plus somebody familiar in his life. He's at the table, and we're using pictures, but we certainly work on these salutations in the real world. He is in a classroom situation here at our center. He also has pull-out sessions as well, and we like to get this right away into the natural environment.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Dad.
Good job. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
You got it. Hi, Abby.
Hi, Abby.
Good go. Hi, Grandma.
Hi. Hi, Grandma.
And the same thing with the word go. Go stays constant, so it's a pivot word, and then he gets to pair it with a verb.
Good. Look, we're going to say, go eat.
Go eat.
Good. Can you sit up and say it? And I say, go eat.
Go eat.
You got it. Go swing.
Go swing.
You are so awesome. Go potty.
Go party.
Yay, Chase.
Okay. So we go on and on into phrases and sentences, comments and questions. And, you know, that little boy came into us without any verbal skills. and he was already turning 5. So as Dr. Chung was explaining, you know, don't lose hope, but it really has to do with techniques and who is teaching and how are they teaching and what are they teaching and what do they know about behavior analysis and how to use the methods that are appropriate to make changes in behaviors. Either we're trying to establish a new behavior, or we're trying to improve upon a behavior that already exists, or we need to eliminate some behaviors, but we need to know a lot about behavior change. Okay, so for those with a childhood apraxia of speech, or those who can produce vowels and consonants in isolation, but they struggle to maintain production within a context. So as I said before, I've been made aware that I know 2 children who have been diagnosed with SETBP1 and who have learned to be effective vocal communicators with the KSLP methods. I'm so excited about that, and I want to talk more about the KSLP. You know, as I mentioned before, there are certainly other evidence-based methods for CAS. The KSLP method has been very effective for at least 2 children that we know, and most likely many more that we didn't know had SETBP1. The KSLP is rooted in behavioral shaping techniques, which I just talked about, and the principles of motor learning. Motor plans of words are initially simplified and shaped toward perfection through reinforcing successive approximations. So just for an example, let's say that the child really loves cookies. They don't have a cup in their repertoire and they're not stimulable for it. No matter what you do, they just don't have that cup. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that word and we're going to change it, but we're going to change it the way that typically developing children would typically change a cup if it wasn't in their repertoire. And so these are called phonological processes. So we're going to change the word cookie to tutti. We're going to see if the child can imitate tutti. And we're always going to model the word correctly. Hey, look at the cookie. Can you say tutti? Yes, here's your cookie. We're going to model it correctly. It may be easier for the child to implement something called fronting using that T for a K. What if they're not successful with that? We might want to try dutti. If they do have the K in their repertoire, but they can't co-articulate it with the E, because being able to say K alone is easy, but to say ki is not, then we might have to reconfigure the word and say cook-e. And they may be able to do that, in which case we're never going to accept anything lower when they're talking about cookies or wanting to ask for them or wanting to comment on them. Nothing lower than cook-e. And when they do it fast enough and become more automatic, they won't have a vocal break. It will be cookie. All right. So the very lowest approximation for any word would be just the main vowel, e. And we're going to continuously work toward perfection of each of these words. We're never going to stop, but we need to give these children a way to communicate with better approximations than what they are attempting on their own. So I talked about the KSLP being rooted in applied verbal behavior or behavior strategies. And if you are watching somebody implement the KSLP or other treatment approaches, these are things that are important to find out, to look for. One of them is pairing and establishing motivation. So remember how we followed the child's lead and we know what's very highly preferred by them. We want to have all of those things available. So we're going to pair therapy materials with highly preferred items and activities. We need to make sure that we define the speech and language goals, implement shaping techniques, and errorless teaching means cueing before failure. We need to fade our cues so that the children's last responses are as independent as possible. We need to make sure that they're getting reinforced for each and every attempt if that's what they need, or make sure that when they do make an error that we correct it in the appropriate way so that their last response is as close to the target as possible. And we need practice schedules and practicing new skills in the natural environment. I'm going to have to speak a little faster because we need to wrap up. So let's see what I can do to make this a little shorter. These are some words that we can teach. In the KSLP, there's 5 lists of single words. One of them is syllable shapes. So CV means words like mama, dada, papa. CV means words like hi, no, bye, to. And the vowel change words are words where the consonants stay the same, but just the vowel change. Mommy, daddy, puppy. Simple bisyllabics are the consonants and the vowels change. Happy, bunny, tubby. And even 3-syllable words like banana, potato, tomato. So we do those different syllable shaped words. We want to give them a list of common nouns to work on. We want to give them a list of functional requesting words or manding words. These are single words that manipulate the environment, like open or up or here, or how about telling us what to do, like come, or even something like watch me or draw. We're gonna also teach favorites. We need a list of favorite foods, drinks, toys, activities, places, people, pets, names, favorite characters. Those are the words that we're going to have to work on best approximations, because typically they're very random and they're very difficult. And then high frequency words, words that just don't follow any of the other lists, even things like please and thank you, or even exclamations, little linking words that we're working on for grammar. All right. We want to make sure that if we're teaching signs or words that we actually don't teach more, want, please, help, all done and again, because those words in and of themselves on their own don't give the listener any information. If the child signed or said more when they walked in my room, I wouldn't know what they want. They may scroll to want or please, I still don't know. So initially, we're going to teach a one-on-one match for highly preferred items and activities. Cookie to get a cookie, jump to get to jump, and then we can put two words. If they can put two words together, these words might be more appropriate, but it's even better to teach them some attributes like color words to describe the objects that they want. And then what word combinations? Here are some pivot phrases where one word stays constant. We talked about hi and go with a little boy that was working with his therapist. And then even phrases, I want, I need, I want to verb, can I have, let me. Come blank with me. It makes it very social, where they only have to change up one word. Everything else is automatic, so they don't have to work so hard to put some phrases together. And then we're going to get into telegraphic language, maybe teaching them to say eat apple once they know apple, or I eat apple, and then put in the article. Also teaching telegraphic language of naming action. Boy eat apple, rather than the boy is eating an apple. We'll get there, and we need to teach syntax and morphology, but they're not ready to increase the motor plans with so much detail right away. And then scripting. Once we can anticipate what a child is trying to say, we want to help them to say it. So children that are just giving you signs or gestures, we want to figure out what are they trying to say, and then help them with a pivot word or phrase. And that's really important to do. Okay. So here are the two children, and this is the end of my part of the conference. They both coincidentally are named John, and they both have characteristics of childhood practice speech, and they both did very well with the KSLP method. So John O, I just was able to see him again face to face. I was in Houston just a couple weeks ago and meet his mother as well. So this little boy, I consulted with a speech and language pathologist who I'm very familiar with. Her name is Nicole Devins from the Caruth Center in Houston, Texas. It's another private practice very much like mine. He started working with her at 3 years, 5 months on reduplicated syllables like mama, dada. He's a smaller child, and so he doesn't look like his age necessarily. You're going to see him at 5 years, 5 months working on bisyllabic phrases, final and F, and he's going to ask to play with a specific toy. John also has hypernasality, air escaping through the nasal passages, which can interfere with speech intelligibility. His parents are looking into, and I think they might have found that he has insufficient velopharyngeal closure, and that will require maybe even surgery to make sure that the soft palate is making good contact with the pharyngeal wall so that there's not that escape of air. But you should always talk to your ear, nose, and throat physician. So here's our videos of John at 3.5 and then to 5.5, and then you're going to see him at age 11.
Dada.
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 Who is it?
Mama.
Dada.
Papa.
Dada.
Dada.
That's right. Who is it?
Papa.
Dada.
Dada.
Good job. It's Dada.
Oh.
Horse. What does a horse say? Neigh, neigh.
Nana.
Neigh, neigh.
Nana.
Good. Neigh, neigh.
Nana.
What does a horse say?
Apple.
Neigh, neigh.
Nana.
What does a horse say?
Nana.
Good job. What does a horse say?
Nana.
Good job. Horse says neigh, neigh. Here we go. Honey pot.
Honey.
Pot. I need to hear your big boy voice.
Bunny.
A bunny hop.
And here he is at age 11. I can't hear any audio right now.
What else did you enjoy about the choir concert?
I sang.
And what else?
I sang 9 songs.
9 songs. That's a lot of songs. Which one was your favorite?
Let Snow and African Noel.
What else did you enjoy about the choir concert?
I'm trying to advance. Okay, and then John, as I do this really quickly, he is a child that I would have the opportunity to work with here at my center. And let's just go to him as a little guy, and then you're going to.
All right, we're going to take this out.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's going to knock down those signs. Do you remember when we played with this before? I
have
at. And I want to hear train. Do it again. Train. That sounds like a train. Do you sit down on the couch?
Yeah.
I
sit down
on the.
I'm going to advance this, and this is John at age 8 years.
Can you tell me who's in your family?
Me, Mommy, Daddy, Wyman,
And
Emery.
Emery. Can you tell me what your favorite food is?
My favorite food is spaghetti, tomatoes, and
Asparagus.
asparagus.
You like Brussels?
I'm going to advance this as well. All right, and there's more information on the KSLP methods through Northern Speech, and there are 2 webinars through Apraxia Kids. If you want to know anything about childhood apraxia speech, it's very important to know apraxia-kids.org organization. They have webinars and literature and genetics information all on that site. And I just want to close with saying that as speech and language pathologists, we are some of the first professionals to notice dysmorphic features in the children we serve. And although medical referrals are typically the role of the pediatricians, we should not shy away from making the recommendation for genetic testing or bringing our concerns to the pediatricians. So it's our hope to identify more children with SETBP1 early and to understand best practices to treat their communicative challenges. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have been invited to speak today.
Thank you so much, Nancy. All of the families on the line, if there was anything that you felt like you missed, you wanted to send more, we are going to share the slide deck at the end of the presentation, so don't be too nervous. And now I want to open it up to everybody for questions. So is there anybody that's got a question for Nancy? I have one that came in through chat, and that is, what are the best things parents without SLP backgrounds can do to help their kids?
Well, without any SLPs working with them?
Sorry, they just clarified. They said in addition to an SLP.
In addition, okay. So I did have a video clip of John's parents working with him and me coaching. And so we really want to coach parents through play. And if you remember some of those pivot words and phrases, those are the things that we would want to help the children to produce. In the natural environment, we want to encourage them to do their single word requesting, even if it's with their best approximations. Knowing what's in their consonant and vowel repertoire and trying to shore up more into their vowel and consonant repertoire. And then looking at their favorites list and figuring out what are their best approximations for those things so that they can start asking for them, even if it's just with single words, in their natural environment. I really think that it's important to work through play if you're parents. It gives you a lot of nice time together, and that you're not necessarily using therapy materials. Although some children they love therapy materials and they might bring them to their parents, but we want to really make it fun and then give the children our complete and 100% attention.
So another follow-up question to that is if their child is working with multiple SLPs, should the SLPs be doing the same things with that child or different things?
It's a very good question. I think it's very difficult to coordinate different SLPs. They have different styles. They have different backgrounds of information and education. One of the things that is important, though, is if the child's working with more than one SLP and they are providing cues, that they try to use the same cueing system, especially for visual hand cues, because otherwise it can get confusing to the child as to what cue they're being shown and to know what they're being asked to produce. Sometimes if the child has speech and language challenges, one speech pathologist might be designated to work on the speech motor aspects of communication, and the other might be working more on the receptive and expressive language aspects of their communication.
Do you have any advice on how to evaluate whether an SLP is a good quality or a good match for a child?
Well, I think that you want to really listen to your child and watch the children's behavior about attending speech sessions. It's our role, the SLP's role, to make sure that the session is fun and that we know a lot about the child's preferences and making sure that we're the giver of good things, you know, and pairing the work with fun and exciting toys and activities. You want to look at your SLP and make sure that they're really paying attention to the child's needs. Do they need more reinforcers? Do they need different types of toys? Some children aren't interested in toys at all. And we're going to have to figure out what is interesting to that particular child and then provide things that are more interesting. Some children only like linear things. They might only like belts and sticks. Or some children may like goop or something that we wouldn't necessarily think of providing for them. So I think we have to make sure that we're really knowing the children and what their highly preferred items and activities are, knowing what level of speech motor skills they're at, and working a little above their level so that they have something to work toward and know how to keep motivated and happy.
Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for any apps or online games for kids with CAF?
I don't have them specifically, but I know there are lists of them on apraxia-kids.org, on the Apraxia Kids website.
And then do you have any opinions or recommendations on the optimal amount of speech therapy per week or per session that a child should be in?
That's also a good question. I think there's some of those recommendations on Apraxia Kids as well. But you know, the way that I answer that is it's about quality over quantity. So if you have a speech and language pathologist who really understands childhood apraxia speech in this case, And Apraxia Kids also has a registry of speech and language pathologists that they feel have at least enough educational background to be effective for CAS. But I just, the question has left my mind. Can you say it again? Oh, quality. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, if you have really good quality therapy, you want to have at least twice a week, half-hour one-on-one sessions. If you can get therapy every day and it's quality and the children are very happy and interested to attend, I would get it as much as possible.
I have another question. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, what's the impact of the child using like an iPad or something, pressing buttons that the iPad itself gives the child a voice?
Well, if you're asking, does an AAC device interfere with a child's motivation to talk? The literature suggests that it actually should be helpful to vocal skills. Just like how teaching sign language is a nice bridge to vocal skills, so can AAC devices be the same. In SLP sessions, if the child is using a device, we want to make sure that they are working just as hard on vocal skills along with the device.
All right, thank you so much, Nancy, for your presentation and for answering all of our questions. We are getting pretty close to 4 o'clock, so I'm going to move on to our final presentation, and hopefully folks are okay to stay on the line a little bit longer to learn about a really exciting research opportunity for SETBP1 that's underway. For anyone that does have to leave right at 4 o'clock, don't worry. I'll be emailing a recording of the full presentation as well as sharing the slide deck after the meeting. So Dr. Morgan, if you would like to go ahead and get started, I'll pass the controls over to you in just a moment.
Thank you. Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me. I will be quite quick, so hopefully you could stay on the line. I think this is a slightly older slide deck, but that's okay. Like Dr. Chung, I had some last minute changes. So I've already introduced myself, so in the guises of time, I think I'll move past the first slide quite quickly. And just to talk about where we are at in the literature, because Dr. Kauffman and Dr. Chung have kind of touched on some of the issues we understand can be present in children with SETBP1. But as you'll see in the literature, actually, these issues haven't been well articulated. So this forum today, you've really heard the most there is to know about speech and language challenges in children with SETBP1. And you are really the expert. So this is really a call out to you, the expert, so we can learn from you about your children. At the moment in the literature, there are really only a handful of cases described where we can get a picture of their specific clinical diagnosis. So whether or not the child has a speech production disorder, such as childhood apraxia of speech, which we've heard a lot about today, or even in one of the children, dysarthria has been reported, so a different type of speech condition. And in dysarthria, we see that there is a disruption to muscle tone, and that then has an impact on speech. So we've heard today some of the children can have muscular weakness problems, and certainly in one of the cases we have seen, that child had fatigue and also had problems with the motor or the muscle execution of speech, not just with sequencing sounds and learning to sequence sounds, as Nancy's been talking about today. In other papers, people have just talked about language being a problem and haven't really pulled out with these issues with vocabulary development. Children have a reduced set of words. Are there problems with the grammatical structure? I mean, again, you're the experts. We've kind of learned from you, yes, these are some of the challenges, particularly when children are first learning and getting the motor speech production going. We know that sentence construction is quite limited. But what we're trying to do is understand more about exactly how different children present and what their specific profiles are. One of the features that I think has come across today and that has been reported in the literature is that there is more difficulty with the expression of speech and language rather than understanding. But at the moment, there is not a study that has systematically looked at, say, even 10 children who have SETBP1 loss of function variants to expressly test or report on specific testing results for expressive versus receptive language. Something that I think is really interesting, and I'm not sure whether families have looked into this literature, you're all very well read, so you might have, is that we don't just see links in children with SETBP1 loss of function variants having these speech and language issues, but we also see in broader populations of children a link between the SETBP1 gene and speech or language function. So if we take children, for example, who have something called developmental language disorder, so these are children without a SETBP1 loss of function variant, they're just children, say, in your local school who have a language disorder, we do see there are links or associations between variation in the SETBP1 gene in those children and their language outcomes. So this is another line of evidence showing us that the biology around SETBP1 seems to be very linked to and important for speech and language. And then if we go even further out, beyond just children even who have a developmental language problem, and we go to the general population, so as parents, you and I, we also see that there is an association between SETBP1, the gene itself, and a particular trait which is thought to be associated with reading difficulties, which is phonological working memory. And it was really lovely to learn about the families and children today, and I saw that working memory was a feature mentioned in some of the children. And so it would be interesting in our study as we go forward to look at whether working memory for sounds in particular is a challenge. And we see this a lot across a lot of children who have speech and language difficulties. But I guess I thought this was just interesting background to show us that the SETBP1 gene for people who study speech and language is really interesting, because it looks like it, again, isn't just children who have SETBP1 loss of function variants who we see this link with language with, but that it's even a gene that's important for speech and language, maybe more generally in the broader population. But as we know to date, there are really no detailed studies where people have just taken a group of children and very systematically examined their speech and language profiles. So as I said, you're the experts. What we want to be able to do is study your children, and if you can take part in our study, and other families where we can reach them, to really be able to help those parents when you have a new diagnosis to understand, well, will my child get first words? When will they develop those first words? When they do start to talk, are they going to speak like their typical peers, or are they going to have challenges with communication? And if they do have these challenges, exactly what do those problems look like? And then, so how can we most effectively and efficiently apply speech and language therapies tailored to the child's specific condition? Because as we saw today with the families, as you were talking about your beautiful children, the children do have different presentations. So we can't really apply a one-size-fits-all, which local therapists wouldn't do, and which Nancy was talking about today as well. As Dr. Chung said, we're trying to understand commonalities. What do we all share as some very common features seen across a lot of children versus features that might be distinct and seen in less children than others. But so we can get this individual tailoring. So that's what our new study is aiming to sort of pull apart and progress for our understanding of children with SETBP1 loss of function variants. So how do we get started, and how might you be able to take part? Well, you could email me right from today onwards, anytime, to express an interest in the study. I then send out our patient information statement and consent form. As Dr. Chung was asked about before, we have ethics approval, or IRB governance approval, to work with individuals across the world, and we have translated our surveys into a number of languages, so specifically Dutch, German, French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and of course English. If you email me and you then are interested in the study, you read the information statement, sign a consent form, we can then send you out a link. The first part of the study is an online survey of your child's general health information. So some of this overlaps with some of the information collected with the Simons VIP cohort information, but we sort of have to do that so that we can interpret your child's speech and language abilities in light of their other health information. So if there are visual deficits or other movement challenges, some of the other health issues that were discussed today by Dr. Chung. We then would tailor a specific further survey of speech and language, depending whether your child's vocal at the moment or more non-vocal. So we really work with you to tailor the assessment battery, just like you would seeing a local clinician. We don't just send out a blanket battery of tools. We try and tailor that to your child's individual needs. For the next step, I would then have a video conference call with you if you're interested for English-speaking participants. This is an optional part of the study. We can get a lot of information from the online surveys, but we also offer up an individual consult to go through and refine some of the diagnosis further with you. I wish I could speak many languages, but I'm ashamed to admit I'm a terrible monolingual Australian. I only have English. We would have loved to offer up those interviews more broadly to people with other language backgrounds. At the end of the study, we always pull together an individual summary report, so we would give you any findings we have from our surveys to you personally, and then of course a de-identified overall report on what we have found through the study. So I just want to thank very much Hayley and the SETBP1 Society. It's been really helpful at working together to see how the study might work best. Also to Brigitte von Bonn, who really first reached out to, she knew I'd been working with a couple of children with SETBP1 loss of function variants, and that I am fortunate in having a lot of time to do research. So she reached out for us to work together in the study. And then importantly to thank the Simons VIP organisation as well, who I've worked with before, an amazing organisation, and I know that we'll be working closely together as we go forward. So I think I'll leave it there. You might have some questions, but as we're close for time, I'm really happy for people to email me questions and start the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. And like I said, or like Dr. Morgan said, if you do have any questions, you can email her. Since we are a bit over time, I'm going to go ahead and just stop the recording, and